Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. This is the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute with a webinar on the very timely topic of the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor, with the additional question, is it happening? Obviously, the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor is not a new phenomenon. This is something that has been in the works for 30 years. But as we will hear from our speakers, very distinguished speakers, I should add, the circumstances in the last several years have led to intensification of the development of this corridor. We have four distinguished speakers, and I will not take time away from them. We will proceed in the order in which they are listed on our program. Detailed biographies of the speakers are available if you go onto the web page of this event on the silkroadstudies.org website, and you can see a lot more about them. I will not go into their very distinguished biographies. Just to introduce them, we will hear first from Mr. Gaidar Abdikerimov, who is Secretary General of the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, an international association, and a friend of our institute. We also have the privilege of having with us today Dr. Charles Kunaka, who is lead transport specialist for transport global practice at the World Bank, who will share the insights of a recently released study on this very topic by the World Bank, who will speak second. After that, we have two speakers closer to our to home, so to speak. We have Dr. Brenda Schaefer, who is research faculty member at the Naval Postgraduate School, and who is co-author with myself of a recent article on the development of the Trans-Caspian Corridor published by the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute in the Central Asia-Caucasus Analyst. And finally, we have senior fellow Dr. Mamuka Tsereteli, author of another article recently published by our institute on this topic. Both are in the Central Asia-Caucasus Analyst, available at CACIanalyst.org. This event is being recorded for posterity, and we hope we have a very good discussion following the initial presentations. Mr. Abdikerimov, thanks for joining us from Kazakhstan. We hope that you will be able to present your insights with us. The floor is yours.
Dear participants, dear Ms. Brenda and Mr. Svante, good morning to all of you, and good evening for our parts. Let me ask for the access to the screen, my presentation. Can you see me?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. Trans-Caspian International Route is developing and expanding continuously. In 2022, we have expanded the geography of our route by 3 countries, which are Singapore, Lithuania, and Bulgaria. Overall, for today, we have expanded to 11 country members and 25 transport and logistics company. We directly have participants in the activities of our route. This all means that there is high interest in our route. For the last month, it's our geography. It's our participants, and for the last 10 months, the transportation through the route have exceeded 2,256,000 tons of goods, which is 16,700 containers. We can see large reserve after working on challenges in our corridor, and as of today's, there is a reserve of 75% for container transportation and 53 for wagon transportation. We can observe both increase the decrease of transportation. They differ of the by the type of goods, because we can see a sharp increase in transporting petroleum products and decrease in transit goods from China to Europe and Turkey. Also, we can see the increase of import container transportation, container transportation from Europe, Turkey to Kazakhstan and Central Asian countries as of today. As I mentioned above, have a reserve of 75% of container transportation. We can transport 80,000 TEUs containers safely and without any problems. Further, as you can see in this slide, this creation restriction in port of Azerbaijan, port of Kazakhstan, and shipping companies in the Caspian Sea. After hard work, we have decreased in the estimated delivery time of transit container trains from 38 days to 19 days. As of today, this is the real time of delivery. It's for the container trains between China, South and East Asia to Europe and back. There are specific improvements made through the corridor, such as expanding the geography, creating and virtual dispatcher center, organizing shuttle trains, digitalization, and international cooperation. For 2024, we have put aim to get competitive tariffs rates and fix it for a long-term period. Competing points of the roadmap, as well as attracting transit container trains from China and Southwestern Asia to Europe and other countries and back. Besides our improvements made by our members, construction of the bypass railway line of the Almaty Junction has been launched, and the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway line in particular Marabda-Akhalkalaki is being completed. Off-dock terminals are being built in the port of Potit, taking into account all the technologies shortcoming of the existing terminals. Also, together with the effort of our participants, we work this with the dry port of Xi'an to make improvements at the border crossing between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Also, the improvements being made in the part of electrification in Azerbaijan. The pass road in Georgia have almost finished. All these projects in the future will give us confidence in the sustainability of our corridor. The bottlenecks we still have, are the interaction of type of transport on the back sea in particular access to the Black Sea ports, also the limited capacity in Georgian ports. Another bottleneck is still the lack of rolling stock in the Caucasus section, as well as export shipments from Kazakhstan. Since due to the lack of locomotive traction, the trains take a very long time from the point of departure to the point of destination. The closure of the Akhalkalaki-Marabda section also creates certain difficulties of the route. There is our congestions at the border crossing between China and Kazakhstan, and all this requires investment to resolve issues. Overall, we want to implement two concept of 5C, which is stable price. First one, speed, service, quality service, sustainability, and safety. We are systematically going towards achieving these goals. Thank you for your time, and I have finished the presentation. If there are questions, we are ready to answer in Russian language. It's this my assistance will be the translation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdikerimov. And now we would like to pass the floor to Dr. Kunaka. If we can change the screen, Mr. Abdikerimov, from your presentation, or if our host can get us back to the normal view.
While I'm getting access to the system to be able to share my presentation, I would like to start off by
we go. Wonderful.
Oh, okay, excellent.
Thank you. Please, Dr. Kunaka.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to the Institute and also to SGD, Secretary General Abdikerimov. Very good to see you again. We met when we were collecting data on our study. So I'm very happy to get this opportunity to share the results or the findings of the report that the World Bank just published a week, actually, not even 2 weeks, a week ago on the Middle Corridor. I will be super brief to keep to the time that was allocated for the presentation. The good thing is that we do have some common views, findings, perspectives with what the SG just presented. So that is, I suppose, a good foundation. And I'm also quite encouraged that some of the issues that we pick up, as you will see during my presentation, are already being addressed. So that I think having that sort of consensus on what the issues are is always a firm base for all of us to proceed on. So very quickly, my presentation is going to touch on 4 sort of main topics. The first one is just to set the context as we see it, and then the approach that we adopted. We recognize that there are many studies that have been carried out on the Middle Corridor and new studies that are ongoing all the time. So it is important to also just outline what we see as the value add of the work that we carried out. And then I'll make sort of a short presentation on our main findings and then offer some thoughts on what we see as perhaps the way forward and some of the recommendations. So setting the scene, it is important to recognize always, this is perhaps taken for granted, that the Middle Corridor is a multimodal corridor. So it does involve different modes of transport. The Secretary General just mentioned exports of petroleum products. They move by pipeline, some by rail. We have road transportation. And then, of course, what brings us all together here is also the shipping on the Caspian Sea. So this is important in the sense that some of the issues that we see are due to the multimodal nature of the corridor. Secondly, there was indeed a spike in the volume of traffic in 2022, but we also observed, as the Secretary General outlined, a decline in that traffic in the first, let's say, 3 quarters of this year. And we need to understand why that could have been. The last issue that I would like to flag here is that we see the Middle Corridor as adding to the resilience of the transport networks across the region, and especially connectivity between Central Asia, Europe, Central Asia, East Asia, but also East Asia and Europe. So this resilience aspect, we also believe, is quite an important one. In terms of why the World Bank is doing this, we recognize there are many other partners that are contributing to this effort. And that also speaks to the fact that the needs are many, as we have seen from all the different initiatives. So there is room for proper coordination, collaboration between the governments, private sector, but also the development banks, but also other institutions, the EU, G7, but also at a bilateral level between the countries. So getting a proper sense of the contributions of these different parties and stakeholders is also important to identifying where value add would best be maximized by the different parties. Our study focused on 3 countries, and this is also quite important to set out front. So the 3 countries that we focused on were Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan. There are questions as to why some of the other countries within the region were not covered. We are indeed implementing right now a phase 2 of the work, and this phase 2 covers Turkey, for instance. But then there are also other topics that deserve deeper understanding, and I'll come back to that during the course of the presentation. The Secretary General did flag the issue of bottlenecks. So our study, we set out to do a couple of things. The first one was to obtain a proper understanding of the trade flows through the Middle Corridor and between these economies, so that we can better pinpoint what the constraints are that impact the flow of different types of goods. And then secondly, we also focused a lot on these infrastructure bottlenecks. And the idea was to try and understand exactly the magnitude and the impacts of these bottlenecks, but on specific commodities as well, not just in a generalized manner, so that we can also see how the development of the corridor could maximize the beneficial impacts. So the trade here, as I said, from a resilience, but also a redundancy point of view, as we saw with the events following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the disruption of some of the trade routes across the region did bring to the fore the need for redundancy in some of these trade connecting transport networks that we have across the world. So we also see that as something that was absolutely important. So in terms of the findings, proceeding relatively quickly here, we see that, or rather we make a distinction between 2 main types of trade flows. The first one, which has been receiving a lot of attention, are the intercontinental or transcontinental trade flows between China or East Asia and Europe across Central Asia. And in our view, we see this type of trade as being relatively elastic. And we saw this in the immediate aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's most of this trade initially switched to the Middle Corridor, but after some time, because of the constraints that still affect the performance of the Middle Corridor, we see some of this trade switching to maritime transport, for instance. And then we have a second category of the trade flows, which is relatively inelastic, if we are to use those economics terms, which is trade that is generated within the region itself. And we see this perhaps as a more solid foundation for the development of the Middle Corridor. For the reason that the elastic trade, there is a lot of competition between these routes, which is something which was very clear in the map that we showed right up front. But what we were also then able to do is to get a disaggregated picture of what actually is flowing through the Middle Corridor and the potential flows between these economies, East Asia, Europe, but also Central Asia, Europe, Central Asia, China, Central Asia, and other economies, to actually get a very clear picture as to what is moving through and how perhaps these economies, the three economies that we studied, could maximize the beneficial impacts of tapping into those flows, perhaps by developing logistics functions along the Middle Corridor and adding value to those flows instead of just exporting these commodities that you can see. So the flows, as you can see in the graph, are dominated by really fertilizer, minerals, grains, and so on. So is there an opportunity here to maximize the beneficial impacts of developing the Middle Corridor by adding value to these commodities? What we were also able to do was to carry out a very limited, if I may say, survey of the stakeholders, of the users, especially the shippers of goods. And what these shippers of goods, and I was very happy when the Secretary General talked about the 5 S's that they are working on. So the stakeholders, they highlighted a number of things. The first one was that prices are high and variable. So this is important. So it is more costly to use the Middle Corridor, for instance. And if you take the cost in addition to transit times that are long and unreliable, so the low reliability or low quality of services on the Middle Corridor is a concern. And then there are frequent delays. So that just adds some detail to the second point, that there are frequent delays, especially at the interfaces between the different modes of transport that we have on the Middle Corridor. So going back to the multimodal nature of the corridor, but especially rail shipping, for instance, but also between rail and rail, the railways of the different countries. So just to expand on these views of the shippers, the way they see it is that there is inadequate coordination along the corridor. And here, the inadequate coordination along the corridor is really in the fact that the different services providers are only catering for their segment of the corridor and not so much providing an end-to-end solution, as we have seen, for instance, with the development of the Trans-Eurasian land bridge between China and Europe, where there is perhaps much better or more effective coordination. The ports are a particular point of weakness along the corridor, based on the survey of the shippers, as are also the railways, that there is, if I may say, fragmentation of services along the corridor. And this also affects the pricing, that each service provider are offering a price for their part of the corridor and not an end-to-end solution. Then the delays at the border crossing points, again, something that came up very early on. And then lack of standardized or integrated information technology systems. So this becomes an issue because of the fragmentation of the different services providers along the corridor, that the flow of information then is a constraint that also hampers the efficiency of the corridor. So coming out of these findings, in our report, we make 5 main types of recommendations. The first one is to reimagine the Middle Corridor as an economic corridor, and this is very consistent with contemporary thinking on the development of corridors, in the sense that it need not be seen as just a pipeline, if I may say, but it needs to connect to the hinterland so that the benefits also flow to the regions within countries that through which the corridor passes. There is a need to offer corridor length logistics solutions. So for shippers of goods, it would be very beneficial if they know, for instance, just from A to B, this is what you need to pay, and this is how long it is going to take without having to deal with the different services providers in between. And this is just reinforcing the earlier point on the fragmentation. Then there is a need to reform and simplify procedures, especially at the interface points between different modes of transport, but also at the border crossing points between different countries to make it easier for transit, for instance, traffic that is going through to pass through. But the reform and simplification of procedures also extends to other aspects, including just the payment modalities, for instance, or insurance along the corridor. Then there is need to leverage the potential of digital data flows. So digitalization, the Secretary General was very clear on this, and we also picked this up and do emphasize, we emphasize this in the report as a potential solution. By the way, the World Bank also has a very detailed report on digitalization, which is a complementary report, or rather the new report is complement to the digitalization report, which details out exactly how this could be implemented, building on the initiatives that are already underway across the different countries. And then obviously, there are instances where infrastructure is a constraint along the corridor. However, what we have tried to do in the report is to add some detail to the types of infrastructure and exactly where these infrastructure improvements are needed. We have observed that some of the reports that we have sort of present a generalized picture of the investments that are needed in infrastructure. But in this case, we are actually much more specific as to which points along the corridor are a constraint from an infrastructure perspective, and there is need to improve either the infrastructure capacity, its efficiency, or to complement that with investments in equipment. So there are also some very immediate measures that we believe could be implemented to enhance the operational efficiency of the corridor. So making sure that prices are transparent and predictable, consistent again with what the Secretary General said earlier, enabling traceability of cargo shipments through real-time information systems. So this also goes to the digitalization. There are moments when goods in flow through the middle corridor are not visible. So the shippers do not know where the shipments are along the corridor. And therefore, we believe that traceability is also quite important in this fact that even for the operators, some of the operators, it could be the port operators or the railways, they are sometimes surprised when shipments arrive and they are not prepared to handle, let's say, a large volume of shipments. Whereas if they had visibility of what was incoming or intended to be outgoing, that would help with the overall efficiency. And this, of course, links to digitalization and the electronic use of electronic documents by both the railways and the Caspian Sea on the sea itself. And electronic documentation, digitalization would help avoid some of the errors that we see in the transfer of information, which causes delays. Just fixing delays, rather fixing errors on any one document takes a long period of time. And this also contributes to the delays that are experienced on the corridor. And then lastly, we also propose in the short term, this doesn't require sort of huge investments in infrastructure, but encouraging cargo consolidation. And this is consistent with maximizing, let's say, the benefits of the corridor by adopting this economic corridor concept. So the economic corridor concept, especially for SMEs, relies on facilities along the corridor to consolidate relatively small shipments so that they can then be carried by rail, for instance. And then incentivizing, this is one of the policy measures that is required, incentivizing the establishment of logistics hubs. We know that in some of the countries, this is already happening to an extent, but it needs to be adopted perhaps much more systematically along the length of the corridor. So I'm getting to the end of my presentation here. So what are the implications of these findings? We conclude that based on the analysis that we carried out, that implementing some of these measures, especially what we call, let's say, the soft type measures, not necessarily big infrastructure investments, could actually enable the corridor to handle triple the volumes of traffic that are currently handled. And the potential is there, especially from the intra or the traffic that is generated within the corridor itself. And also this would have the travel time by 2030. So we are saying that over the next 6 or so years, there is scope to actually reduce the amount of time that is taken on the corridor by half. But more importantly, to make that time also much more reliable, because at the moment it's very variable. And then the other measures that we also see as having a big impact just through coordination, for instance, and offering shippers in particular this ability to better arrange and monitor the flow of traffic. So this would be, again, another very important beneficial impact of some of the measures that have been proposed here, and targeting of infrastructure investments. This, we believe, is also a bit different from other reports that we specifically target, as you'll see when I come to very quick examples on each of the countries, better targeting of the infrastructure investments, especially at the port rail interfaces, but also in some of the ports. And then we believe that the corridor has the potential to attract a much larger share of the China-Europe trade, but this will remain a very small part of the overall trade between China and Europe. So that will always be small, but it is the potential to attract perhaps a niche market within that type of trade. Some of it is happening, but there is scope actually for this to increase. So lastly, what we have also done is for each of the countries, the 3 countries that we studied in detail, to identify some potential quick wins, for instance. And you'll find that there are some consistency in terms of the themes that we touch on. So the first one, just reducing the amount of dwell time in the ports. So Aktau port in Kazakhstan, for instance, so the cargo dwell times, they are long, but they are also very variable, so they are unreliable. Increasing container shipping capacity. What we observed across the Caspian Sea is there's some asymmetry in the capacity of the shipping services. So you have more capacity, for instance, in one direction than the other direction. And this also complicates operations in general. And then the shipping rates and port tariffs in general, we also find that they are relatively high on the Caspian seaports, compared even to some of the major seaports in the world, that the charges, for instance, in the different ports are much, much higher. And this also contributes to the high cost of using the middle corridor. And then the other measures here on availability of rolling stock, this does affect the railway operations and contributes to the unreliable capacity in some instances of the corridor, which also resulted in the decline in freight volumes in 2023. So what we did was, we made we identified specific quick wins for each of the countries. So this is on Azerbaijan, again, shipping rates and port tariffs, dwell time in the ports, and then also the border crossing points between Georgia and Azerbaijan. We see some delays there just due to poor coordination, let's say operationally, between the railway lines. And then lastly, in Georgia itself, again, improving port rail operations in in the port of Poti, for instance, there were some localized constraints with regards to movement of goods between the seaport and also the drayage operations to the pickup points for the railway line. So very localized constraints that are faced. And we detail out some of these proposals so that they are better targeted. And the key message really that we're trying to convey is you may need infrastructure investments, but these infrastructure investments, they vary by country. And therefore, the prioritization of the investments needs to reflect exactly where these constraints are faced along the corridor. And if this is implemented, then we provide this breakdown of the potential traffic volumes by 2030. And again, this helps to pinpoint where in the system and along the corridor these constraints are likely to be faced. So you find that in our assessment, for instance, some of the segments of the railway systems to the eastern part of Kazakhstan, for instance, that's where you may have more acute capacity constraints and therefore could be prioritized in terms of infrastructure investments, but you also have constraints in each of the ports of all three countries that we studied in detail. So lastly, and in conclusion, this is my last slide. So the World Bank, as indeed other partners as well, we understand is as continuing to support the governments of the region, but also interacting with the private sector and other partners to continue the investments in policy reforms, but also in infrastructure to really unlock the potential of the Middle Corridor. And on the World Bank side, we are really applying the full suite of tools and instruments that are available, be it technical expertise, but also policy advice, as well as investments and infrastructure. One of the key studies that is underway right now is on the falling level of the Caspian Sea. So we see this as a major risk along the corridor. So that study is already underway just to understand better what may be needed, for instance, to operate within that environment of falling levels. Do you need dredging? Where do you need dredging? And that's, do you need to redesign the vessels that are used? So all that is being studied in some detail. So with that, thank you very much again for this opportunity, and we'll be happy to answer questions when the time comes. Back to you, Swante.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kunaka. While our friends take care of the technical, there we go, that was fast. I should say that between Mr. Abdikerimov and you, Dr. Kunaka, we have an extremely thorough understanding of what we're dealing with in terms of the technical aspects, and you know, it's very realistic. We see the potential, but we also very clearly see the work that has to be done there. Obviously, we have not been hearing so much about the political aspects of this, because that was not the purpose of either of your presentations. But I think we will be hearing more from it as we shift to our two other speakers. Brenda, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Cornell. And it was great to follow these two presentations. And I think the fact that the World Bank conducted this study is actually an indication of, you know, the sign of the times that the Middle Corridor is increasingly of interest to multiple stakeholders, and and it's great to see the resources the World Bank applied to the region. So as you mentioned, the sort of the political aspects, one of the sort of big picture geopolitical developments that you and I in our recent study have identified is the development or emergence of an alliance system between Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Central Asian countries, mainly Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And this is a completely new development. Up until now, the states of Central Asia only concluded agreements which had a security and defense component with Russia. This is the first time that they've concluded agreements with a country outside, except for Russia. I think we noticed in our study that both negative and positive factors have brought the states of the region together in this emerging alliance. So, some of the negative, it's the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, which has created a security threat to the region. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has also created a security threat to all the states of the region, especially those that border Russia, such as Kazakhstan. And also, so on the positive side, also a demonstration effect in the 2020 Azerbaijan-Armenia war, seeing that Turkey can help Azerbaijan restore its territorial integrity, giving hope to other countries that that Turkish cooperation with Turkey can have meaningful security benefits, and not just the more symbolic trainings or that you can have with the EU or with the United States, but actual security, but actually strengthening your security. So one, the geopolitical framework has strongly increased between key states in the region, and this facilitates the trade and cooperation that we've been talking about in the previous two presentations, and one of the emerging trends is potential and actual cross-Caspian energy trade. So for decades, the EU, the United States, world organizations, institutions like the World Bank have promoted cross-Caspian energy trade. A lot of conferences, a lot of declarations, a lot of meetings, but really not a realization. But now actually we're seeing realization already on the oil field, after several disruptions of Kazakhstani oil in the Black Sea, in Russia's Black Sea ports. Increasing volumes of oil are going across the Caspian in various forms of small tankers, with the interest of all the sides to increase those volumes significantly. And steps that used to be baby steps and maybe are becoming adult steps for export of Turkmenistan's gas westward. So again, something that's been talked about for decades, been promoted, but always there was pretty much a lot of pessimism. I think that one of the main factors, again, the security threats that threaten all of the Central Asian states, but Turkmenistan is also dealing with with potential demand destruction or lack of reliability of demand from China, surprisingly, for gas, as Russia increases its gas exports to China. They're cheaper. So it's not clear if over time China will take the same volumes of gas, natural gas that it's been taking, and therefore it's an additional reason that Turkmenistan is looking to diversify its gas exports. We're also seeing across the Caspian energy investments, especially from Azerbaijan, SOCAR, in different formations with other international partners, in development of Central Asian gas, especially with the emphasis on Uzbekistan's immense potential, but also immense gas market itself, which makes it commercially a lot easier to invest in Kazakhstan exploration, because you have a market sitting and waiting there for the volumes. It's not only about export, and so that's another linkage across the Caspian. What we can learn from and we discussed this in this report, that the infrastructure vision has to take place years before the needs. So if we look, for instance, on energy volumes, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline was built with much larger capacity than the peak, or not much larger, but larger capacity than the peak oil period for Azerbaijan's oil exports, with Gaidar Aliyev at the time saying that it's clear Central Asian oil at some time would come, and that that capacity should be there, because it was clear at some point there would be a need for it. The same is clear with the Southern Gas Corridor that was also built scalable, and already when it became operational in December 2020, there was already demand in early 2021 for its expansion and for new volumes. Obviously, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there's even more demand for Azerbaijani and other Caspian gas to come into Europe. So that infrastructure already being built, scalable, fields under development in Azerbaijan for the future, already could anticipate that demand. The same thing is with different Caspian versions of infrastructure. You could say that if we compare, for instance, initially the CPC conception versus the BTC conception, CPC was kind of like, which, by the way, interestingly enough, America supported both, even though they're very different concepts. But CPC was built on sort of a neoliberal vision that if Russian companies and Russian authorities can, will benefit from transit, then that oil flow will never be disrupted. BTC was built on a more realist vision that there will always be geopolitical reasons for coercing or stopping or disrupting energy flows, and therefore you need your main oil export to go through only allied countries. In the case of Azerbaijan, that was Georgia and Turkey. So we're seeing the importance of today of having diversification of routes of infrastructure, and also, yes, geopolitical factors are a reality. They can't be ignored, and that countries are not just because of some transit fees going to hold back from using different geopolitical tools. A big factor. So there was a big infrastructure vision after the demise of the Soviet Union that created a lot of opportunities for the states of the Caspian, and that this vision was really led, or at least was brought to the finish line, thanks to the leadership of the United States. I mean, consistent, bipartisan, across administrations, and having a really forward-looking vision. And seeing that, especially in the case of the energy resources, that for the state, not that the U.S. needed to put a flag on those resources or get access to them, but understanding that if the countries of the region don't have ability to export their goods to world markets, their energy production, they won't be able to have free foreign policy and free national security policies. But unfortunately, the United States is missing in action, actually maybe by choice. So I guess it's not missing, it's decided not to participate in anymore. The Biden administration gave an order in October 2021 for all the embassies and U.S. different parts of the U.S. government to refrain from engagement in anything related to oil and gas and coal promotion, both production and transit, even though 84% of the energy consumed in the world is fossil fuel. So to sort of say America will pull out of the game that is fueling our world as it is quite a risky prospect. The U.S., together with the G7, that same year also declared the end of support of public finance for fossil fuel projects. Recently, the Biden administration also gave a new order to the State Department and to the embassies that diplomatic personnel won't even participate in conferences that deal with oil, gas, and coal, even to learn, to study, unless there's some exceptional needs. So we don't have that same historic role of the United States that brought to realization the BTC, the Southern Gas Corridor, even playing a big role in CPC. And it's very curious if without that geopolitical backing, we can bring these new projects, this new infrastructure, to realization. Something that might catch the administration's attention is and again, we recently, last week, there was another disruption of Kazakhstan's oil exports from Russia's Black Sea ports. Basically, Kazakhstan exports and over close to 2% of the global oil export. And that's enough, even though it might sound, well, what does it matter, 2%? Since oil prices are always set in the margin, it's actually that 1 to 2% that can make all the difference in oil price trends. So essentially, Russia has a lever now in an election year in the United States to pretty much spike the global oil price at will. by disrupting Kazakhstani oil exports. So that might, this negative factor might actually attract the administration's attention, that somehow it has to guarantee the free flow of these energy resources, which will have, of course, regional but also global impact and impact for the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda, for this very sobering analysis of what are the political and geopolitical ramifications of what we're talking about, because obviously, even though we all see the importance of the container trade and the other aspects of this corridor, energy is at the heart of what made this corridor possible in the beginning and will continue to be at the heart of this corridor in the future. Mamuka, there is a lot left to be said, I think, and you will say it.
I'll try at least. I will spend a few minutes on maybe picking up where Brenda left, and then maybe comment a few other issues that we are presented by other speakers. But I just wanted to start with the point that transit and connectivity issues are priority research topics for our institute for decades, and our chairman, Dr. Fred Starr, led these researches for, and his leadership definitely has to be highly appreciated and recognized here in this discussion today. Just moving to the topic that Brenda was discussing at the end of her remarks, I think there's one important technical detail, but it's not technical, it's geopolitical. Different branches of U.S. government are working right now on Black Sea strategy for U.S. I think this is coming from both administration as well as U.S. Congress. And I think and I see some temptation to keep Black Sea somehow isolated from development in the Caspian region and from the issues of connectivity between Black and Caspian Sea and Central Asia and beyond. I think it's very important that if Black Sea strategy for U.S. government will have any value, it has to be seen in a broader context of entire regional development. For Central and Eastern European states, for decades, with a decades-long dependency on Russian resources and Russia-linked infrastructure, South Caucasus and Central Asia is obviously major potential alternative for resources, and thinking about recovery projects in Ukraine going forward. I think this connection, this linkage with Central Asia and Caucasus absolutely is essential. And obviously for the landlocked countries of very resource-rich countries like Central Asia, countries are like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, obviously Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan. The South Caucasus access to markets has a critical importance for economic and both political survival as a sovereign state. So this again, connectivity has a strategic value for the entire region that is stretched from the Eastern Europe through Black Sea, through South Caucasus, through Central Asia to all the way to borders with China. And obviously, we have positive stories. Brenda mentioned about history of energy development. There is significant flow of energy from Central Asia and South Caucasus to Europe. This landmark project that brings natural gas molecules from Caspian Sea all the way to Italy is obviously evidence of that. But potential of general cargo transit and transportation is definitely not fully utilized, and it requires major attention from both regional countries, but also from international actors like whether it's United States and European Union. European Union in particular, I think, needs to pay more attention to this because of genuine interest in trade with partners both from China but also Central Asia. Sometimes we forget that these countries in Central Asia possess resources that could play very significant role going forward in the economic growth in not only just Eastern European and Central European countries, but generally in Europe. At the same time, this is a large market for European goods and services. So that's, I think, focus from the World Bank to look at this region as an economic corridor is the right one. It's also right one to look and to emphasize that I think going forward, and I think I emphasize it in my report as well, which is called Strategic Value of Connectivity for Central Asia and South Caucasus. I think this corridor is more important probably and will remain more important for countries of the region than for other actors, whether it's China or ultimately at some point maybe the Indian subcontinent. It will play a certain role for trade and transit for these large regions, but it will be more limited than importance for Central Asia and the South Caucasus itself. But again, looking at entire picture in a system, as a big picture of this region and this issue of transit and connectivity, unless we look at in its entirety, it will be difficult to really come up with the right strategy going forward. We've heard numbers from our colleague from World Bank, and tripling volumes of current transit is really not that much if you look at the ultimate numbers. We are talking about somewhere in 11, 12 million tons transit in Caspian. So, but this is in a sense a realistic assessment based on what we have now and what type of infrastructure constraints or governance constraints do we have now. And one other detail I wanted to mention based on this, that there were a couple of points about bottlenecks, and maybe I'll spend a few minutes on bottlenecks. Caspian mentioned, and also level of Caspian Sea. Sometimes we don't recognize that, or there's limited kind of understanding how shallow Caspian Sea is and what type of depths of ships could operate in the Caspian Sea. Unless there is a significant buildup of flotilla of Caspian ships that connects the east and western shores of Caspian Sea, even that increase will be very limited in terms of shipping through Caspian. So Caspian is definitely remain one of the most important bottlenecks, and probably most important bottleneck in the system. If you look at the port capacities, and again, World Bank study emphasized that there is still spare capacity, almost in all sides of the significant spare capacity in the Caspian Sea ports. There is a significant spare capacity in the Black Sea ports. And by the way, study doesn't indicate there's a newly developed port facility in Poti, separate from APM terminals, funded by US government, which has a 3 million tons capacity right now, 1 million ton additional capacity, and 100,000 TEU potential container shipment capacity there. So, but if you look at numbers, what are these ports are servicing right now, particularly on the Black Sea side? It's mostly inbound cargoes rather than outbound. It's more like what comes to the region, not the transit cargoes that crosses the region. And there's this, Dr. Kunaka mentioned about conversations with the private sector. I also have conversations with the private sector. When shippers want to ship something to China, let's say from South Caucasus, they don't even consider sending it through Caspian, Kazakhstan, and to China. They are sending it through all around the world by sea because of the, again, time, because of the cost, and because of some of the constraints that are presented by the infrastructure developments there. I mean, and they were mentioned also in the study, this like a connection between rails and ports. This is very important. I think, I think all countries have this issue. When railways and ports need to be connected, it takes significantly more time than it has to take. In general, when I think about overall kind of picture. I think cost of coordination is prohibitive at this point for private sector to look at this region as a transit. I mean, for countries like Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Turkmenistan, when they need cargo, they need to look at where they can get it. And when they need to send somewhere their resources or cargoes, they have to look at multiple alternative options. But they don't have a kind of, they cannot avoid this need, right? But if somebody who is transiting cargoes through this region, coming from whether it's China or some other country, ultimately maybe Afghanistan, again, India or Pakistan or other countries, they will look at financial cost, but also obviously speed and the efficiency of the corridor. And that's where we all have a lot of work to do in terms of cost of coordination and really bringing it down significantly. I know that there are many kind of details that we can discuss, but I don't want to take too much time from other speakers, because I think it's more important to hear them than me at this stage. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All of our four speakers provided great food for thought on so many aspects of this issue. I'd like you to collect your thoughts. I'd like also any questions from the audience through the Q&A function. And we can actually start with one that's already there from Robert Cutler, who has a question that's specifically to Dr. Kunaka, which relates to the perhaps commonalities versus difference of approaches between the study that the World Bank has conducted and that the EBRD did not long ago, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps you could speak a little about how these are complementary to each other, I assume, and how you see the different roles. You are muted, sir.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much again, and really fascinating perspectives on the connectivity and transit options across the region. So the way we see it, I would perhaps rather emphasize what we think is the value add of our report. And the reports are complementary, right? So we have indeed, during the course of our own study, maintained some interactions with the other partners that have also been carrying out complementary studies in the region. So the value add really is in the precision, I would say, that we are providing on the trade, so the trade insights of the World Bank report. We see this as a very sort of a distinct value add. Of course, the other reports also do touch on these trade flows. But we believe that the sort of much more granular approach that we provide here gives you these insights on the specific commodities and the opportunities to maximize the value of improving the operations of the corridor. The second aspect, as I mentioned also in my presentation, is on the better targeting of infrastructure investments. We believe that this is also a value add which complements the other analysis that have been carried out. So when you look at the proposed investments, they add up to billions of dollars. But what we are trying to do in this report is to say there are some specific points that are much more immediate constraints right now in terms of corridor operations, and perhaps those could be better prioritized to unlock the full potential of the corridor. So the studies are very complementary, just to repeat that. And when one reads all the various studies, USAID and many others that have been carried out, then you get, I believe, a much more complete picture as to what needs to be done on the middle corridor. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like now, let me see here. Yes, we'll go back to that question in a moment. I'd like to go to Mr. Abdikerimov and see, as a first speaker, if you have any comments on the points that were made by our other speakers, and if there's something you would like to add at this point to the discussion.
Да, я бы хотел мистера Чарльза Кунака спросить по поводу, когда вы говорите экономический коридор, что вы имеете в виду? Потому что у нас есть несколько определений данного понятия. Вот в частности, World Bank, что имеет в виду, когда говорит, что это экономический коридор? Translate.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of my questions would be going to Charles Kunaka. Mr. Charles Kunaka, thank you. I would like to thank all of the people who have also spoken at this webinar. And my question would be this: when you say economic corridor, what exactly do you mean by this? Because we have different meanings of, you know, the saying economic, but I would like to hear your opinion, and what does World Bank Group think about, what do they mean when they say economic corridor?
Есть несколько определений, понятий, и можете конкретный пример привести?
Yeah, so there are different meanings of this, and we would like to hear if you have you know, a certain explanation to seeing middle corridor as an economic corridor in particular. Thank you very much.
Please, Mr.
Oh, okay, you want me to take this now? Sure. I will be super brief. This is always a fascinating topic and one can spend a lot of time discussing. But in brief, what we mean here is, instead of looking at the corridor just as sort of a transport route, we need to explicitly consider how this corridor benefits the regions through which it passes. Let's say at the subnational level in Kazakhstan, subnational level in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, and so on. And that, we believe, is a much more sound basis and sustainable basis for investments, because then you are enlarging the hinterland of the corridor, and it then benefits these regions and economic centers through which it passes. So the distinction that we try to make here is between a purely transport or a transit route compared to an economic corridor that is part of the economic infrastructure of the regions through which it passes in any one country. And that is, we have quite a lot of evidence from elsewhere in the world that this is actually much more beneficial as a transmission mechanism to benefit the economy of a country than just targeting imports and exports, but also facilitating trade, even at a domestic level, because then you are supporting the economic basis of the regions through which the corridor passes. So that's, I'll pause there, but happy to elaborate, of course, if necessary.
Thank you. There's a question by Professor Jones. If we can expand our horizons either in the north-south way. This is primarily an east-west corridor, but there is a question, obviously, of how this links to South Asia. I happened to be in talks with some Uzbek colleagues just last week, in which, you know, unbeknownst to many, there is actually work that is being done on linkages through Afghanistan, even though there are very serious difficulties with the Taliban regime there. I see Mr. Abdikerimov nodding, Dr. Kunaka as well. How do you see this as being a realistic connection at this point, or are we talking something that is much longer? Perhaps we'll leave it there. Dr. Jones also asked about links up to the Baltic. Any of you could feel free to pick and choose from those issues. Who would like to start? If nobody's wants to start, I'll ask Mamuka.
Well, I can say a few words before, just to stimulate maybe thinking. But talking to some private, again, shippers, I know that part of the coal that used to be shipped via South Caucasus last year. By the way, just to comment again on some of the elements of the study from the World Bank and the presentation for Dr. Kunaka, actually, a lot of these cargo shipments are definitely driven by market conditions as well. When there was a bigger demand for fertilizers, there were more shipments of fertilizers. When prices went up, somehow demand reduced, then shipments were reduced. So this is very market-driven process as well. We cannot just say that necessarily there will be this or that type of cargoes going to this or that direction without taking that market conditions into consideration. But clearly there is some movement of some of the cargoes that we are avoiding Russia last year, going through Russia to the even Baltic ports. And so this north-south transit is definitely taking place. There are also obviously some shipments of great variety of products from, let's say, Turkey to Russia, from other countries of South Asia through Caucasus or Central Asia to Russia. So clearly that corridor is functioning, and probably more than it was functioning last year. And whether there are sanctions or not, it's not really as felt this year as it doesn't feels that this is as harsh, let's put it this way, as it used to be in the previous 12 to 18 months. So if the question was about whether Russia is still used as a transit for some of the north-south, south-north cargoes, yes. Answer is yes. Russia is widely used, and as we also know, a lot of Europeans are buying a lot of Russian goods as well. So that's another kind of subject of conversation, of course.
If I can add another geopolitical aspect, not directly related to Afghanistan, but how geopolitical events can affect the desirability of the middle corridor and other land corridors. And as Dr. Kunaka pointed out in his report, you know, we often look at competing land corridors, but the real competition is between sea versus land transit. But just think right now we're at a situation where the Black Sea has physical disruptions. You know, the war between Ukraine and the United States has moved to the maritime arena. It's some of the most important aspects are taking place in the maritime arena. And even when there aren't physical threats to shipping, there are very high insurance rates. Move down south a bit, you have the Mediterranean region with high shipping rates and some ports disrupted because of the Israel-Gaza war. Move a little bit across to the Red Sea, Houthi disrupting civilian shipping there. Again, raising costs, and we'll probably see a lot more disruptions and physical threats and hijacking and kidnapping there. Move to the Arab Gulf, potential disruptions if the war in the Middle East spreads to Iran itself. So we could easily see ourselves, we're already, you know, of these, the major routes being at minimum much more, sea routes being much more expensive, and at minimum potential disruptions, you know, all along the route in between Asia and Europe. So there's importance for these routes, even just as the redundancy, reliability, and again for these peaks in shipping costs, which are probably going to become, you know, kind of a new normal. It's hard to imagine that, for instance, what's happening in the Red Sea with the Iranian proxy Houthis attacking international shipping there. And by the way, there was some interesting, the last two ships attacks have no connection to Israel. Somehow Goldberg and Iceberg got mixed up there in understanding where these ships are from. And as the old joke goes, so I think it's becoming more and more of a norm that we're going to see with hybrid warfare attacks on civilian cargo, and even if they're not direct attacks, at least enough attacks that it raises global shipping rates.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdikerimov. Perhaps you have something to say about the connections from Central Asia to the south.
и югом.
И, конечно же, мы открыты, вот предыдущий вопрос прозвучал, мы открыты Узбекистану, для всех центральноазиатских республик мы открыты, и Middle Corridor, он всегда будет готов. Мы свои предложения отправляли крупным транспортно-логистическим компаниям региона, они знают. Но, кроме того, мы, не дожидаясь их вступления в наш коридор, мы для них сделали именно условия транзита через Middle Corridor, и мы хотим им гарантировать те же сроки, те же стоимости, это, чтобы все было стабильно. Вот правильно сказала Бренда Шафер, нужна нам стабильность, стабильность в транспортировке, стабильность в ценах и стабильность, чтобы грузоотправитель видел и понимал свое ближайшее и среднесрочное будущее.
Yes, of course. So we are open to the whole Central Asian market. We are ready to work with any country, even to say that we have already sent our messages to the major companies, or for example, Uzbekistan, yeah, and we are ready to give them the same conditions for all of the participants that we give to all of our existing participants of Middle Corridor, even before becoming our official members. So we are ready to work with any country just to improve the route itself. And I agree that it's very important to make this route stable. We need stability in price. We need stability in duration of, the estimated duration of transportation. And I understand that it might not be as easy right now, but we are all working. And as I said in the beginning, we are open to any countries and any region to work together in order to improve this route and to finally get to this stability.
В логистике это называется надежность функционирования логистических цепей поставок. И мы к этому стремимся. Это одна из главных целей наших.
In logistic terms, this is called as reliability of functioning in supplying chains. So that is what we're trying to achieve right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Спасибо.
Thank you. There is I'd like to paraphrase a question that came in through the Q&A, which is about the approach that Russia is taking or could take to the corridor after, depending on how the situation in Ukraine develops. If anybody would like to comment on this question, because I think there is a kind of a sense out there that it's always been that Russia has been very negative towards the corridor. I'm not sure if that's entirely true or if there are aspects of Russia using this corridor actually, but there is also obviously the question of Chinese interest in this corridor. But if anybody would like to address this this question, which was as asked by an anonymous attendee, I'd be grateful. Who would like to start? Mr. Abdikerimov, please.
Участники российского транспортного рынка крайне негативно относятся. Они видят в нас возникающую конкуренцию. Они, кроме того, нас называют обходниками России. И нам это не особо нравится, потому что мы, когда создавались, у нас цели совсем другие были. Это мы после 22 года начали как бы применять именно те рычаги, которые мы как бы начали применять. То есть те грузы, которые не могут проехать в Европу через Россию, они проезжают через нас. И, конечно, естественно, им не нравится, потому что в некоторых портах наших российские грузы, они не могут проехать. Для них есть конкретный четкий запрет. Но как бы опять-таки же я повторюсь, что когда мы создавались как коридор, мы имели таргет Турцию, мы имели страны Северной Африки, и мы имели в виду страны Южной Европы. И мы нашему коридору, хотя многие из слушающих сейчас узнали об этом только в 2022 году, мы создавались 10 лет тому назад, еще до первого конфликта, российско-украинского конфликта. И я прекрасно понимаю, потому что я жил в России, я жил в Украине, и там я по 5 лет жил. Я их прекрасно понимаю, о чем они ведут речь, что они имеют в виду. И мы прекрасно их их заботу мы понимаем, потому что Украина наш член нашего коридора. Мы их поддерживаем, и мы украинские железные дороги, порты украинские, через Украину мы раньше выходили спокойно в Европу. А то, что кому-то что-то не нравится, значит, надо вести себя прилично. Я так считаю.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would like to say that we can feel the exact, that we can feel that Russia is definitely not a fond of this middle corridor, But first of all, I would like to say that when this route was created 10 years ago, the aim was not, excluding Russia. The aim was going to the Turkey market, to the North African countries, to the Southern European countries. So a lot of companies and a lot of countries only found out about this in 2022. Yeah, when a lot of countries and companies were transporting and they didn't want to go through Russia, so they would use us. And we can say that a lot of companies call our route bypass Russia, which is not true. I would like to say one more time that the reason of creating this Trans-Caspian international transport route was not bypassing Russia. It was, this cooperation between these countries to go from Central Asia to European countries, because, I have lived in Russia for 5 years. I've lived in Ukraine for 5 years. So I know the market very well. And I know what are they talking about. I know what are their concerns, and I understand. Because before, we used to work with Russia for a long time, and we used to go, it was much easier for our route to be transported because we would go from Ukrainian ports directly to, European countries. But I understand that they are not fond of this route, but you have to behave in order to not to get to this point. Thank you very much.
Спасибо. И мы сейчас больше концентрированы на технической реализации нашего коридора, чтобы он состоялся, когда все вот эти конфликты закончатся, они рано или поздно закончатся все равно, и мы были вполне самостоятельным направлением и коридором, и как вот сегодня Чарльз сказал, господин Чарльз, мы должны стать экономическим коридором, и мы должны стабильным коридором быть вне зависимости от геополитической ситуации, которая есть и мы наблюдаем сегодня.
Yes, and I would like to add that the main point for us right now is we are concentrated on the technical realization of this route, because sooner or later this conflict will come to an end. We don't know when, but eventually it will come to an end. So when it does, we want to ensure that our corridor will be as interesting for the companies as it is now. So when all these conflicts will end, we will be an independent corridor, as Mr. Charles have also said about the economic corridor, that we will be an economic corridor, that we will not depend on any geopolitical situations in the world, and we can work, as an independent corridor itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody like to add to this specific question? Mamuka.
Just to echo what was just said, I think it's important to look at the future and again look at future from like holistic point of view. And I know that we are coming to the end of this conversation, so just wanted to say that I think it's particularly for the organization that Mr. Abdikerimov is leading to have a I think this study is probably very helpful to have a perspective for next 10, 15 years in terms of what infrastructure is developing, what type of organization kind of reforms are needed in terms of governance issues, in terms of coordination, in terms of digitalization, all those things were mentioned here. But I think it's very essential that we see entire picture for entire corridor. I know that there is a roadmap developed between countries of the region, between Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Georgia. And I think it's essential that there are more detailed sort of plans. You know, we cannot develop railway in Kazakhstan, ports in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, and then everything else in South Caucasus, and not have enough ships on the Caspian Sea to connect east and western shores of Caspian. So same things that we can bring some other. You cannot develop all this infrastructure and do not have connection between railway and the port, right? So the entire thing needs to be seen in a broader kind of context, and also building new infrastructure elements in a sizable ones, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20 million tons, or whether it's ports or other things, also need to be seen in this phases of developments of the corridor, depending on again who will play in terms of geopolitics will have a role in that, but there are certain needs that the region will have which are going to be there no matter what.
Я бы хотел дополнить господина Мамука Церетели. Конечно же, некоторые вещи, факты, они имели быть место в нашем коридоре, но они имеют устаревший формат, потому что на сегодняшний день через Каспийское море нет проблем с нехваткой судов. Это было в 2022 году летом, но мы провели работу над ошибками, мы провели, вернее, ввели новые суда, контейнеровозы. Для примера, то, что вот я в своем показал в презентации, там есть два ключевых слайда. Один из них по резервам нашего коридора. Там 75% есть резерва реальных, которых мы сегодня можем задействовать. Мы сегодня законсервировали два контейнеровоза, которые мы именно переоборудовали под наши перевозки. Из-за снижения объемов перевозок, причина которой, одной из причин, это плохой сервис на нашем коридоре, это мы должны признать. Второе, это то, что Deep Sea, глубокое море, упало в 10 раз по сравнению с прошлым годом, потому что все китайские порты ограничения карантинные сняли, и суда начали циркулировать намного быстрее, их стало больше, и таким образом рынок обрушился в 10 раз. Было 14 тысяч долларов доставка из Шанхая до Роттердама, Гамбурга в прошлом году. В этом году он стоит 1400 долларов. И представляете, это по нам очень сильно ударило. Мы это все понимаем. Сейчас переведут, я потом мысль закончу.
Yeah, along me speaking, I might be asking also because it's a lot of information. So I would like to add what Mr. Mamuka Tsereteli talked about, not having enough ships at the Caspian Sea. Yes, we know it is, you know, details that we know, and it's true, but it was maybe in summer of 2022. But right now, as I have this information on the slides. There are two slides that have this information about the reserves reserves that we have, for example, the 75% reserves, and we have also built an 2 container ships that are able to, you know, work exactly on our terms of middle corridor. For example, we know, and those were the 2 reasons why we did that. The first reason is the bad service in the, you know, the Caspian Sea, and we accept that, and we know that we're working on that. And the second one is that the deep sea, что вы сказали насчет deep sea?
10 раз уменьшение стоимости перевоза.
Yeah, so the deep sea cost has been decreased 10 times. As before, it was $14,000 for transporting from Shanghai to Rotterdam, and right now is $1,400.
И вот у нас есть чисто 3 контейнеровоза, которые в Каспийском море. А у нас, кроме этого, мы можем еще привлечь 6-7 сухогрузов универсальных подконтейнерные перевозки у Каспийского морского, азербайджанского Каспийского морского пароходства. И таким образом мы можем увеличить в любой момент не хватающие суда. Кроме этого, на прошлой неделе мы праздновали 25-летие судоходной компании Казмортранслот, и были введены в эксплуатацию еще 2 танкера, которые призваны транспортировать нефть между портами Актау и Баку. 2 танкера.
Also, we want to say that we have 3 container ships at the Caspian Sea, and also we are one of our members, the Azerbaijani shipping company, also has 6 to 7 big ships that are able to be used in, you know, no time, in real time. So we have all the ships at the Caspian Sea that is needed to provide, you know, good container flows. And also last week there was a little anniversary of big shipping Kazakh company Kazmortransflot of 25 years, and we have launched 2 tankers that is, you know, able to be used right now.
Thank you. I think we're out of time almost.
Ага. Хорошо.
Thank you very much.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. We're a little over time. I would like to thank our speakers for their contributions. This is you've provided us with a lot of detail into the very specific issues that are presently being handled. And what we can see is that there is a level of engagement. There's a level of engagement from governments in the region. There is a level of engagement from multilateral institutions, and there is also a level of engagement from the private sector. What I think is missing at this point, very clearly, and Professor Schaefer alluded to this, is some hard to understand policies on the part of the U.S. government. In terms of compartmentalizing the different aspects of what kind of goods go into this corridor. If it's something related to fossil fuels, we can't talk about it, but otherwise we are apparently in support of it. This obviously is not something very constructive. We will be back already on towards the end of the week on Friday with another event that looks specifically into the implementation of reform in this region. This is something that came up here. Reform came up by Mr. Abdikerimov and Mr. Kunaka. So we will have many opportunities to continue this conversation. For now, I'd like to thank all our speakers as well as our translator, whom we did not see, but we heard. There you are. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for the questions from the audience, and we look forward to seeing you very soon again.